Hey everyone, my name is Jose, and this app changes everything for budget phones. If you want your smartphone photos to be better, what's the solution? Well, besides editing your photos, which most people don't want to do, I believe the answer is dedicated computational photography apps, and this is what makes this video the 1 year update to last year's video on that exact same topic. Now, there is one specific computational camera app that is extremely popular in the Android space that I didn't fully cover in my 2022 video, and that is Google Camera. Google Camera, also known as Gcam, is the default camera app for Pixel phones, and technically, it's nothing special. Just like any other smartphone, we all have a default camera app. For example, my Huawei phone has a default camera app, and it's just called Camera. It's not called Huawei Camera. But what makes Gcam special is that people have somehow found a way to extract the app from Pixel phones and port it to non-Pixel phones while preserving all of the processing that makes Pixels take great photos. That means if you don't like the photos that your phone takes, well, you can just download Gcam, which will give your photos that pixel processing that just makes those types of photos really good. For example, let's say you have a $300 phone. Well, you can actually take photos reminiscent of actual Pixel phones, and it works absolutely great. It's super wonderful. For context, my $300 Poco X3 Pro is from 2021, and hardware-wise, the main sensor's somewhat average size, and it has a mediocre ultra-wide. Those are the only two cameras you use most often, and they're kind of fine for $300. But then you also have a depth sensor and a macro sensor, which is just really mediocre and is really just filler, more than anything else. But look at this comparison of the default camera app versus Gcam. At first glance, you might like how Gcam looks, and there's a lot to like. You'll notice a few things. First is the elevated dynamic range Gcam brings, where there is just better contrast of highlights and shadows. It's just more controlled, especially when you have blown out exposure. That HDR on Gcam is awesome, and it's one of Gcam's greatest strengths. Second is the rendition of colors. Colors on Gcam feel more natural and sometimes pretty accurate the way it captures colors, but it does affect how other colors look, and that leads me to number 3, white balance. Google's white balance is often better than stock. It's also tied to color rendition because colors look a lot more accurate on Gcam than stock, where stock can add stylistic interpretations to how colors look, and that's not always the best approach in most scenes. But when indoors, Gcam is just way better with a more cleaner looking white balance, and the noise is just heavily reduced, and indoor scenes is probably Gcam's most suitable environment. More on that later. Also, Gcam has a bias against the colors red, and it will add insane amounts of warmth to it. So never take a photo that has more than like 10% red in it. Otherwise, they would come out looking like this. It's an easy fix. Just turn off Google Auto White Balance in the settings, but you need to be careful in checking your photos when you take them because you don't want to blindly take a photo without checking up on it if the white balance has decided to freak out because there was red in the scene. Fourth and last is detail. Gcam does capture more detail when we crop in from 1x. Gcam just adds a whole lot more detail, and besides HDR, this is my favorite characteristic of Gcam, just adding way more detail into photos while simultaneously removing noise. Digitally zooming in on Gcam is just better than the default camera app. You can see less noise on Gcam and generally more detail. You have this really aggressive smoothing effect on Gcam, but it's still way better than the default camera app, and it feels like you have a dedicated telephoto sensor in this regard because it's just so much better. Then we have the ultra wide camera, and you'll instantly see that the white balance is completely off. Again, Gcam isn't supposed to run on my Poco phone, so you need to turn off Google Auto White Balance when using the ultra wide, selfie, and all the other cameras. Now we get photos that are actually usable, and you see that the white balance between the two photos is actually very similar, probably because Gcam is using Xiaomi's white balance algorithms, but that's just my guess. You also notice that the photos are less saturated, which is an easy fix anyone can do, which is why as of right now, I'll be slightly boosting the saturation of Gcam ultrawide photos just so that it doesn't distract you. And it's the same thing as the main camera. Gcam has better HDR with less clipping highlights, and there's more detail when we crop in. These photos are just a lot better with way more richer details and less noise, especially for indoor environments where Gcam has reduced noise and better dynamic range. Again, one of its greatest strengths. So using the ultrawide in indoor scenes actually feels usable and good now compared to how stock treats these scenes. What about selfies? Selfies on Gcam are again just extremely good. That processing, that detail, it looks like a flagship phone took these selfies. Just really good, and I'm very impressed. The colors look great, the HDR, the details on my face, very good overall. Sometimes the HDR can look overdone, but it can be okay at times, and the bokeh segmentation is very competitive, though it can have several faults. Testing video was actually disappointing. From what I can tell, Gcam just isn't optimized for video, no matter the use case or scene, so we will skip video for all the sensors. Lastly, let's look at night mode. For the main sensor, this is just astronomically good. I am amazed at Gcam's ability to not only have better dynamic range, but also richer details. I thought these photos couldn't be as good as they are because the Poco has a somewhat small size sensor, but no, Gcam just works great and is a miracle worker in low light. The only problem is that the algorithm is just not optimized to handle clipping highlights well, despite the HDR it has, so the Poco's default algorithm will just win in this regard, but I will still take these Gcam photos way more than stock because of the details it's adding in photos, which we can see by cropping in. It's just a lot more textured. This is still reflected with the ultrawide sensor. This ultrawide sensor is just mediocre-like, but these results have you somewhat second guess that because you realize that Gcam is able to work with this stupid sensor and still pull off very bright and accurate photos. This is tremendous miracle work for this small 8 megapixel ultrawide camera. Gcam just makes his sensor actually usable and rips off that mediocre tag name from it. Again, with textures, it's just way better. With low light selfies, you can still see how Gcam photos just continue to be better with better textures and everything else I have said so far. Just very impressive results. So we all see that Gcam is great because of the reduced noise, because of the elevated dynamic range, because of its capture and rendition of textures, especially textures. Gcam is a texture machine. It's great for a lot of reasons, and that's why there are tens of thousands of videos and forum threads and Telegram groups talking about how to get Gcam working on your non-Pixel phone, because it's a literal miracle worker for the tens of thousands of budget phones that take very low quality and disappointing photos. I have been using Gcam for months for all the strengths I just listed. You want more HDR in your photos? Gcam. You don't like how the colors came out? Gcam. You need more textures? Gcam. Need to digitally zoom in? Gcam. Need better night photos? Gcam. Better selfies? Gcam. Stupid ultrawide? Gcam. There is a lot to like, which is why you would need to try it out for yourself to see if what you get with Gcam is better with what you get with your stock camera app. And if that is the case, especially for indoor and night environments, Gcam is just a no-brainer to me. And if you don't immediately see a difference between stock versus Gcam in low light or even in the day, 90% of the time you probably benefited from enhanced textures, and that's just one of my favorite characteristics of Gcam. It literally is a texture machine and is just jaw-dropping what you can get during the day, and especially in low light, especially with the ultra wide and selfie sensors. It's just that good. And here's just a very quick comparison on a video that I already made on the Solana Mobile Saga. And I just want to show you that stock versus Gcam, that yeah, Gcam just continues to be very, very good with any device. It's just not isolated on my Pocophone. You can get these results practically on any device. I have hundreds of stock versus Gcam photos, but even though I can talk about Gcam all day, we have to move on to other things. So there's a lot to learn from Gcam from all the samples I showed you. But the one thing you should really learn is that sensor size on any sensor, on any smartphone sensor, ultra wide, selfie, main camera, it doesn't matter. It's not just about sensor size. It's all about processing. Also, that universal camera app by Adobe that has been in the making since 2020 is still not here with no new updates at all. But if done correctly, it will work just like Gcam. You buy a budget phone, but through the power of apps, it will turn those low quality photos into flagship grade results. And Google, you could completely do the same thing. Just think about it. You make a universal camera app that does what it's supposed to do, improve the quality of photos on any phone with any hardware, and you just monetize it with a monthly subscription, then you just hit gold. I believe a universal camera app made by Adobe or Google will be as big as GPT by OpenAI, or even GAN models like Midjourney. If you do this, I swear you will be as big as like GPT by OpenAI, and you will be super, super popular, especially with all this AI frenzy that has been happening over the past year. And I don't know how people manage to extract the APK with all of the processing of Gcam imported to other phones. But if you can do that with Vivo's camera app with their uncanny HDR, then I would absolutely love to see that and love to test it out. So remember, it's not just about the sensor size. It's all about the processing. And I think Google has our back with that. And if you want to know how to safely install Gcam, I have a short video linked in the description on how to do that. But other than that, this video has been in the making 4 months, and I'm so happy to get it out. And my next video is going to be equally as awesome. You're going to love that. So stay tuned for that. But other than that, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.